All right. My name is Cherish Daly, and this is Existential Therapy. I just kind of wanted to start off with letting you guys know that if you felt like Adler was broad, this is a very, very broad theory, and I didn't realize that until I started this journey with exploring existential therapy. So bear with me because this is a lot. It's a lot of key figures, a lot of concepts. So it's just a lot. So here we are, existential therapy. So we're going to start out with this journey together. And I say journey because I feel like existential therapy is a journey. They really talk about how it's together with client and therapist. So this is our journey together. Of course, we'll talk about key figures, what needed it fulfilled, when it came about, some key concepts, what causes hurt and suffering, and what promotes change. So here we go. We're going to talk about key figures first. There is a bunch of them. Like with Adler and Freud, there was just a few. But I feel like with this theory, the people that contributed to the concepts are very important. So I felt like I'm going to spend a lot of time on that. And you'll understand why as we get into this, because this theory doesn't really have a whole lot of techniques. It's really a lot of concepts that these people have contributed to it. So first person. I'm going to probably slaughter some of these names. I tried to listen to them on Google, and I'm going to do the best that I can. Viktor Frankl, 1905 to 1997. He was born and educated in Vienna. He founded the Youth Advisement Centers there in 1928 and directed them until 1938. I thought a really fun fact about him was that from 1942 to 1945, he was a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camps at Auschwitz, and that's where his parents, brother, wife, and children all died. He vividly remembered his horrible experiences in these camps, but he did not allow them to dampen his love and enthusiasm for life. Which I thought this was a really interesting concept for someone to go through an experience like that and still love life and see the greater goal for living. You'll find with existential therapy that life and human nature is the ultimate goal, is to just live and be your true authentic self. A few things that he did is he wrote 2 books. He wrote more than that, but his main ones were his compelling book on man's search for meaning. And he was a student of Adler. He developed an existential approach to clinical practice before his grim years in the Nazi death camps. His experience basically confirmed his views. They say he lived his theory. He experienced the truths expressed by existential philosophers and writers who hold these choices in every situation. Even in his terrible circumstances, he believed that you had a very big spiritual freedom and independence of mind. Anything could be taken from a person except one thing, which is the last of human freedoms, he says, which is to be able to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So to choose your own way, so to speak. He believed that the essence of being human lies in searching for meaning and purpose. So he also developed logotherapy, which means therapy through meaning. The central themes running through his works are life has meaning under all circumstances. So will to meaning. We have the freedom to find meaning in all that we think and all that we do. We must integrate body, mind, and spirit to be fully alive. So all his writings kind of reflected that, and he really lived his theory. So I thought he was very, very interesting for going through some of the things he went through and remaining positive. This theory is all about positivity and owning your own life. So some quotes I put on here is he who has a why to live or can bear with almost any how. and that which does not kill me makes me stronger. So we see this quote a lot. So as I was doing research on this theory, I thought it was very interesting how a lot of these quotes that you see on Google or on the internet, or some of these positive self-help quotes, I feel like could be very existential. So now I'm going to feel like everything I see, I'm going to say that's very existential. Our next guy, Rollo May, 1909 and 1995 or 1994. His quotes, "It takes courage to be, and our choices determine the person we become." So more concerned with the problems of being rather than from problem solving. He was also a student of Adler. He lived in Ohio and moved to Michigan as a young child. He remembered his home life as being very unhappy, a situation that contributed to his interest in psychology and counseling. In his personal life, May did struggle with his own existential concerns and the failure of 2 marriages. So, another fun fact about him is that while he was pursuing his doctoral program, he came down with tuberculosis, which resulted in a 2-year stay in the sanitarium. During his recovery, he spent many time learning firsthand about the nature of anxiety. He also spent time reading and studied the works of Kierkegaard. So his main thing was anxiety, the meaning of anxiety. He had a popular book called Love and Will, which reflects his own personal struggles with love and intimate relationships. So I said earlier, like, he wanted to be more concerned with the problems of being rather than with the problem solving. So it takes courage to be, and our choices determine the kind of person we become. So it's all about like kind of choices and owning your own life. I'll probably say that quite a few times during this presentation, just because I feel like it's kind of like you can no longer be a victim to yourself. You can't say, this is the way I grew up, or this is what happened to me, so this is the why I am the way that I am. It's more about self-awareness, finding out who you are, and just becoming a better you based off your actions. Like they didn't take lightly to having a victim mindset. So he also questions of being include learning to deal with issues such as sex and intimacy, growing old, facing death, and taking action in the world. So as I was doing research on this theory, I found that death is a really, really important aspect of this theory, because they felt in the existential mindset that death wasn't a scary thing, that it was something that, you needed to embrace and not waste each day. Like, don't waste your day because death is inevitable. So he was an interesting guy. He contributed a lot to existential. Irvin Yalom, his quotes, I highlighted givens of existence because we'll talk about that later, and overcoming the terror of death. So like what I just explained, he lived in Russia and he lived in the inner city and found refuge in reading. So his major figure in group psychotherapy. He also wrote many novels. He felt like reading was very important in the ultimate way to live, so to speak. So he wrote Existential Psychotherapy, Love's Executioner, Lying on the Couch, and many more. He had many, many, many writings. And he felt like group counseling was an important aspect to it. So when we talk about givens of existence later, it's like ultimate human concern. So a brief of that would be freedom and responsibility, existential isolation, meaningless, and death. Those are the existential themes that they really focused on for this theory. So moving on. What is existential therapy? So here's another quote I decided to throw in here. Whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. This is something that I see a lot. And after learning about this theory, it is very existential, because if you are not changing your circumstances, you are ultimately choosing to be that way, to feel that way, to think that way, to live that way. So existential therapy is more of a way of thinking rather than a theory with specific techniques and a clearly defined model. I told you guys that in the beginning, this is really just a concept, and there isn't like a specific model or techniques that you use. You kind of just keep the same mindset that existential mindset and the existential goal, and you kind of just pull in techniques based off that unique individual. So it's very, very, very individualized, very centered to the client. Very philosophical approach that enhances the therapeutic practice. So I said before, it explores themes such as mortality, meaning, freedom, responsibility, anxiety, and aloneness as this relates to a person's current struggle. The goal is to assist clients in their exploration of the existential givens of life. So how these are sometimes ignored or denied, and how addressing them can ultimately lead to a deeper, more meaningful, and reflective existence. So when we talk about getting into the phases of existential therapy, we'll talk about like kind of resistance or denial of one's actions and kind of making those things aware. The therapists kind of make those destructive behaviors or way of thinking or not owning their actions. They'll make it aware through therapy and then kind of work on it from there. So self-awareness is a really big key in existential therapy. So how did this theory come about? So basically, in the 1940s and 1950s, there was a big contribution to the existential therapy movement. And it also arose and spontaneously in different parts of Europe and among different schools of psychology and psychiatry. Many Europeans found that their lives have been devastated by World War II. So World War II was a big contributor to existential therapy because they struggled with existential issues like feelings of isolation, alienation, and meaninglessness. So early writers of this theory focused on individuals' experience of being alone in the world and then facing that anxiety of the situations. So very European existential perspective. It really focused on human limitations and the tragic dimensions of life. So World War II was a big contributor to this, but there was also early philosophers and writers during the 19th century that contributed to the creation of this therapy. So those are some ones right there that I have listed. Oh my God, their names are so hard to pronounce. Nietzsche, I think is what Google told me. Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Sartre, Buber, Binswanger, and Voss. So let's explain those a little bit. So each contributed significant themes, and so like an overview of their themes that they contributed, because the book really does a good job of explaining each one out, because all of these are used in therapy. So Søren Kierkegaard focused on anxiety, despair, fear, dread, guilt, and nothingness. Friedrich Nietzsche was death, suicide, and the will. Martin Heidegger was being your authentic self, talking about isolation, individual responsibility, also touched on death, and then caring. Martin Buber, interpersonal relationships, he explained an I-thou perspective in therapy and being like transcendence for the self. Ludwig Binswanger had a existential analysis, choice, freedom, and caring. Medard Boss is being in the world, and then time, how time is important and crucial. Then Jean-Paul was meaninglessness, responsibility, and choice. So all of these really contributed as we get into the key concepts of existential therapy. They had some really important choice words in each of their explanations, which we'll kind of go over in a little bit. So what causes hurt and suffering? So when someone comes into existential therapy and they want to talk about what causes them pain, this is what we're going to go over now. So the first one being the view of human nature. So the existential tradition seeks a balance between recognizing the limits of tragic dimensions of human existence on one hand and the possibilities and opportunities of human life on the other. So the current focus of this approach is on the individual's experience of being in the world alone and facing the anxiety of this isolation. So, like, no relationship can eliminate isolation, but aloneness can be shared. So they always say that loneliness and anxiety will always be present. That's something that you just cannot eliminate, but you can learn to cope with it and choose how it affects you. Um, so there's 6 propositions of this basic human condition. So when we talk about those are the capacity for self-awareness. So I always said self-awareness is very, very key in existential therapy. Freedom and responsibility, creating one's identity and establishing meaningful relationships with others, and the search for meaning, purpose, values, and goals, and anxiety as a condition of living, and awareness of death and non-being. So those 6 propositions we're going to kind of go over in detail because I feel like they're very, very important because those are the 6 areas that existential therapists really focus on. So proposition 1, which is what I had talked about earlier. So the capacity for self-awareness. So this is the freedom, the choice, the responsibility that constitute the foundations for self-awareness. So our freedom, our choices, and our responsibility. So they think the greater our awareness, the greater our possibilities for freedom. So the more aware you are with yourself, what you love, what you value, what's important to you, what your goals are, the more awareness we have of the world and ourselves, the more possibilities we are to be free. We aren't bogged down with anxieties and worry. So to live fully, we must expand in certain areas. Time isn't unlimited. An action is a decision. So that's very important. Inaction is a decision. We create our own destiny and then alone, but have a possibility to relate to others. So like being connected with other individuals, writing our own destiny, acting, literally action, and then knowing that our time isn't unlimited. So to kind of create each day like it was our last, so to speak, in that way. So I like talking about self-awareness because I feel like self-awareness is very important to being mentally well. So if we're going to talk about some areas of emerging awareness that individuals may experience in the counseling process, so this is what it would kind of look like. They begin to see that their identity is anchored in someone else's definition of them. So a lot of times we're living for others instead of ourselves. We are also trading the security of dependence for the anxieties that are accompanying choosing for themselves. They also learn that they are keeping themselves prisoners by some of their past decisions and that they realize that they can make new decisions. So it's letting go of the chains of the past and kind of embracing our present and our future. They learn that although they cannot change certain events in their lives, they can change the way they view and react to these events. So, in other words, not being victims to things that have happened to us and kind of changing our path and changing our way. So, proposition 2 would be freedom and responsibility. So we create our own destiny. Freedom is important in existential therapy as well because they want you to make your life how you want to live. And it is your responsibility to make those actions happen. So 3 values being the freedom to become, to reflect, and to act. So to be inauthentic, which is like not accepting personal responsibility. So some of the quotes I said a minute ago was like, I grew up this way. It's the way that I was made. It's just who I am. That's a very victim mindset. And they don't want their clients to think that way. They may come in thinking that way, but they should end the therapy relationship no longer victim blaming. So authenticity, which is true to our own evaluation. Freedom, which is responsible for our lives, actions, and failure to take actions. And existential guilt, which is being aware of having evaded a commitment. So those are some really important words to remember when you're thinking of existential therapy. So they really want you to be authentic. And when you're not being authentic, you're deceiving yourself. When you're not acting on your freedom and failing to take action, that creates a mentally unwell mindset. So the therapist really assists clients in discovering how they are avoiding freedom and encourages them to learn to risk using it. So clients may look to counselor to direct them and to give them advice or produce magical cures, but that's not what's happening here. The two tasks of the therapist are inviting clients to recognize how they have allowed others to decide for them and encourage them to take steps toward choosing for themselves. So, okay. It's a lot of info, so bear with me. So Proposition 3, striving for identity and relationship to others. So this one's important. We strive for connectedness to others. We strive to create our own identity. And rather than trusting ourselves to search within and find our own answers to the conflicts in our lives, we sell out by becoming what others expect of us. I put that quote on there because I thought it was very important to have, because I think that we all get lost in this a lot. We don't trust ourselves to search within. We usually look to others. And I like that it said we sell out by becoming what others expect of us, because I think that, myself included, we get caught up in being what others want us to be rather than being our own authentic selves. And I think in my research with this theory, it highlights a lot of things that a lot of us need to work on. Like I had mentioned in class, being present. Like it's very important to be present. And this theory really wants you to be present and in the moment and live each day to the fullest and have those connections. So our being becomes rooted in their expectations and we become strangers to ourselves. I really liked that too. So I think those are important quotes to kind of remember. So it had a few section headers on here. So the courage to be, the experience of aloneness, the experience of relatedness, and struggling with our own identity. They really describe in this proposition how finding your true self, finding your true identity, and having a positive connection with people other than you will eliminate that aloneness, and you'll be able to relate to others by having that authentic self. Okay, Proposition 4, so the search for meaning. So values is very important. A really key component of existential therapy is highlighting your true values, maybe eliminating old values. So like the book described, discarding old values, maybe those values that you feel like you don't need anymore, that you're not really living, that's not really true to yourself, and kind of finding your new way. So values is very important in this proposition, because it could lead to existential neurosis as the experience of meaningless, or existential vacuum, which is meaninglessness in life can lead to emptiness and hollowness, or a condition that Frankl calls the existential vacuum. And then creating new meaning, which Frankl said about logotherapy, which is designed to help clients find meaning in life. The therapist's function is not to tell clients what their particular meaning in life should be, but to point out that they can create meaning even in suffering. So this view holds kind of that human suffering can be turned into human achievement by the stand an individual takes when faced with it. So it's all about, kind of like Victor said, when faced with a tragic thing, it's kind of like how you handle it and what you do with it that makes you who you are. So not letting the tragic event own you. So kind of, aren't we all, we're all kind of just striving for the meaning that we need, the meaning we need in life, the significance for our purpose. So logotherapy really highlights how it is to find meaning. So Proposition 5, anxiety as a condition of living. So they didn't want you to fear anxiety because, like with death, anxiety is inevitable. It kind of shapes who we are. it makes us stronger, or it could cripple us. So existential anxiety is the unavoidable result of being confronted with the givens of existence. So death, freedom, choice, isolation, and meaninglessness. So, I mean, every single person deals with anxiety. Now, there's normal anxiety, which is an appropriate response to an event being faced. So, like, anxiety doesn't have to really be a fearful thing, because you're supposed to have anxious feelings about big events or, things that you're unfamiliar with, kind of like scared of the unknown. But when it becomes neurotic anxiety, this is anxiety about concrete things that are out of proportion to the situation. So a lot of us do experience neurotic anxiety as well. So it highlights, appropriate anxiety and what is neurotic anxiety, and kind of recognizes what ails you, what upsets you, what's something that pulls on you, that bogs you down, that triggers you daily, that gives you all these anxiety-ridden feelings. Like, let's talk about it and explore it. So the last proposition is the awareness of death and non-being. So they look at death as a positive, and gives awareness to death as a basic human condition. We're all eventually not going to be here anymore. So, but they felt like if you fear death, you fear life. So one focus in therapy is exploring the degree to which the clients are doing the things they value. When we emotionally accept the reality of our eventual death, we realize more clearly that our actions do count, and that we do have choices, and that we must accept the ultimate responsibility for how well we are living. So those quotes, live each day like it's your last, don't ever waste a day, because when you're fearing the inevitable, you are only hindering your living. So I think that's really important for this. Just overcoming the terror of death. Okay. So what promotes change? So let's talk about the therapeutic process. So the goal of existential therapy is to assist clients in moving toward authenticity and learn to recognize when they are deceiving themselves. So existential orientation holds that there is no escape from freedom, as we will always be held responsible. To relinquish freedom, that's the ultimate in authenticity. So to not have freedom over your life, to not have freedom over your decisions and actions, you're not really truly being authentic to yourself. They help clients face anxiety and engage in action that is based on authentic purpose of creating a worthy experience. So therapists help clients reclaim and re-own their lives. So feelings of hopelessness and dread and angst and meaninglessness and nothingness, fear of death, fear of this, fear of that, they really help their clients kind of reclaim and re-own these basic human conditions. So the 4 essential aims of existential therapy would be to help clients become more present to themselves and others, assist clients in identifying ways they block themselves from that fuller presence, and to challenge clients to assume responsibility for designing their present lives, and to encourage clients to choose more expanded ways of being in their present lives. So therapists with an existential orientation usually deal with people who have what could be called a restricted existence. These clients have a limited awareness of themselves and are often vague about the nature of their problems. So they really see, if any, options for dealing with life situations, and they tend to feel trapped, helpless, and stuck. So therapists really assist clients in seeing the ways in which they can constrict their awareness and the cost of such constrictions, and then basically hold up a mirror, so to speak. Like, this is you, this is what you're doing, this is your life, let's fix it. Okay, so role of therapist and client. So the therapist function and role is a subjective view of clients. So this is the client's worldview, and there is no set of techniques that is considered essential in this theory. And they really, I said it in the beginning, they really want the client, they really base their strategies and techniques off that individual. So really, they want their clients to get creative. We're going to talk about the phases in a minute, the phases of therapy, but they sometimes they ask clients to reflect and write about daily problems they encounter. This is increasing self-awareness. They encourage experimentation inside and outside the therapy office. And the therapists create their own way to be attuned to their clients. So what works for one client, the building of the rapport might not work for another. So they have to really attune themselves to each individual. But the client's experience in therapy, so the client's responsibility is to take responsibility for their lives, to take action based off insights during therapy, and to experiment with the new ways of behaving in the outside world. That's very necessary for change. So that action component, the awareness and the action component, is very necessary to have change for why they initially came to therapy. And the ultimate concerns rather than coping with immediate problems. So if they come into therapy and they're like, I'm having this issue right with the here and now, an existential therapist won't really focus on immediate problems. They really want to highlight the ultimate concerns. Like it's a bigger picture than what you're right now experiencing. So therapist is fully engaged with client and embarks on the journey as a team. So that's why in the beginning I said this will be a journey, because the basic component of this is the relationship between the therapist and the client. The book even described how intimate it was. The therapist really has to be in tune with who they are as an individual, their values, where they stand, because they don't want to get lost. They don't want to lose themselves in the process, because the process of this type of therapy is so engaging. It's putting yourself with them and riding the journey with them. So, like I said, the ultimate basis is a positive changes relationship with the client. Existential therapy is a voyage into self-discovery, and the therapist must be aware of their own self. They strive to create caring and intimate relationships with their clients to achieve the subjective experience of their clients. So it's really, really, really therapist puts themselves in their shoes and rides this train with them. So the core of the relationship is respect, and the therapist has to model the behavior and their authentic self to be made credible. So what they say inside and outside, how they act, I mean, that's just normal in a relationship. If you don't seem authentic or don't seem honest, you're going to lose credibility. So the therapist has to be very aware of who they are and follow up and be as credible as they can. So the therapist's presence is both a condition and a goal. So the therapist needs to be present. They need to actively engage. They need to follow up appropriately. Presence serves the dual functions of reconnecting people to their pain and to attuning them to the opportunities to transform their pain. So the relationship is very, very key in this journey. Therapeutic techniques and procedures. I told you it's not technique oriented. It uses techniques from many models. Practitioners prefer description, understanding, and exploration as opposed to diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. I found this very interesting. So they want to understand and explore the issues rather than diagnose and treat. Self-disclosure is important from the therapist. So this is in relation to the relationship with therapist and client. So self-disclosure is okay here. Techniques and theories do not heal, but the encounter between therapist and client as they work together do. Individual creativity of therapist and client. So really getting creative, like one of the techniques for writing, maybe drawing, using other aspects to kind of talk and connect. Interventions are responsive to the uniqueness of the client. So what you pull from one model and one client might be different than what you pull from a different model for another client. So we talked about phases of existential therapy earlier. So we have initial phase, middle phase, and final phase. Initial phase is assist clients in identifying and clarifying their assumptions of the world, and the middle phase is fully examining the source and authority of their present value system. And the final phase, which would be take what they're learning about themselves and put it into action. So a lot of responsibilities on the client. Once you make aware of what ails you, figure out what you value the most, what your goals are, and then put them into action. So clients that are appropriate for existential therapy, substance abuse issues, racial, ethnic minorities, LGBTQ clients. So, struggling with identity and searching for meaning, grief and loss, confronting death, facing major life decisions, developmental crisis. This theory works for all these groups of people. Now, these people also have to be committed to dealing with their problems about living and have to be ready to start a new chapter. And also works well with clients who are suicidal or on the verge of dying. All right, I know that was a lot. So I kind of wanted to talk about some questions that I feel like are important and related to this theory. These are questions I would like you guys to ponder, or maybe we can talk about in class next week. So what one existential theme is a key issue for people today? What does existential anxiety mean, and how do you deal with it? Why are values important in existential counseling? Existential therapy has few techniques, but an existential frame of mind. What techniques would you incorporate in existential therapy from other models? Which set of clients would this theory not be good for, or what are the limits of this type of therapy? And then what are the benefits of existential therapy? Thank you.